Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Kristen Carter is an author and a certified coach. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2008 and again in 2018. The second diagnosis forced her to reevaluate her entire life and what she wanted out of it. We talk about how important it is to find your own authenticity and consciously create a life full of joy, a life without regret. This is a story with great wisdom as well as practical advice for living your very best life. Kristen, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for having me on Bump in the Road. My story is kind of one of cancer and also living. I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer 4.5 years ago and was so sick by the time I was diagnosed. Within a couple of weeks, I was in liver failure and wound up in the hospital needing a procedure to help unblock my liver so that I could live long enough for chemo to start. So it was a pretty dire situation. And I remember thinking while I was in the hospital, I was there for 10 days, that if I make it out of this, there are some things I'm going to do differently. I had, until that point, kind of focused most of my life on helping others. It is true of my Enneagram personality style to do that. And I had been focused on, friends and my work and my children, my husband. And I thought, boy, this is time for real. If I hadn't spent enough time focusing on myself up until that point, I sure was going to from that point forward. And by that, what I mean is not to be selfish or anything, but to live more authentically, be kinder to myself, indulge my own dreams and the things that made me happy and the people who made me happy. And fortunately, by the time I got ill, I had been a certified life and family therapy and positive psychology coach for 10 years. So I had quite a few tools at my disposal that I could use to help me frame, help me achieve those goals of mine. The long and the short of it is I did respond to treatment. I continue to respond to the chemotherapy regimens that I've been given. There's no guarantee of how long you'll live with metastatic breast cancer, but I choose now much more proactively how I live and what gets my attention and who gets my attention. And I feel like I'm living more true to myself than I ever have before in my life.
Is it a process?
So it's kind of been a pivotal experience toward the positive, ironically.
Now, is it a journey, do you think, to live true to yourself? I certainly look back over my own life, and so much of it was comprised by pleasing others, achieving, doing what you're supposed to do, which wasn't necessarily always in alignment with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do agree with you that it's a journey, and it continues to be a journey for me too. I might have made that decision in a day or in a week, but then living it is different. Challenges come along all the time to your, best laid plans. But I have a daily practice. It's a kind of just a journaling practice that follows a few tools that I've created for myself out of all of my out of all the coaching things, I've distilled down the ones that I think are most important and most helpful to me in this process. And so I don't forget. So I don't forget what my priorities are. I write them down every day.
What are some of those priorities that you've distilled down?
Well, there's an acronym for it, which is SIMPLE, because I think it ought to be simple. And the S in SIMPLE is for success, which used to mean to me, and I think does for most people, especially in their most active working lives, is about work. It's about, what you produce, how much you get paid for it, what you get called. And that was true for me right up until I got sick. I was running a coaching practice and blogging regularly and sending out a newsletter. And now I realized you can define success any way you want to. Success could mean studying more, traveling more, focusing on the rest of the things in this acronym, which I'll get to now. The I is for your interests. What really makes you lose track of time? What do you enjoy doing so much you would do it voluntarily, right? If you walked into Barnes and Noble or your big favorite independent bookstore, what section would you go to? What piques your curiosity? And so I have today read some more in my 44 Scotland Street book series, which I'm loving right now. The M in SIMPLE is meaning. And to me, what your meaning and purpose is about is what you leave behind, what connects you to something larger than yourself. And for me, that's where a lot of my work goes now, because I write a regular column for survivingbreastcancer.org that's about this whole idea of pivoting toward the positive when a negative experience happens to you. And so which is also kind of my work. And my blogging is very much along the same lines. So my work now goes under my meaning category. The P in SIMPLE is for people. And really, this is the category that I would put the first, because really love is what it all boils down to in the end. If I had just weeks to live, I would have spent every waking moment with my husband and kids and my dad and my brothers and my dearest friends. And so that's easy. So P is just when I fill out my daily thing, it's like, who am I seeing today, or who has it been a while since I've connected with and want to just reach out to? The L in SIMPLE is for living. And I put under that category mind, body, and spirit. What am I doing to grow my life and to nurture myself in each of those ways? So it might include something like eat more greens today, or go for a walk. Spiritually, my growth goes there. And that's often to do with reading, meditation, or mindfulness, that sort of thing. And finally, the E in SIMPLE is for your emotions. How do you want to feel today? I knew I was seeing you. I knew that we were going to talk today, so I wanted to be confident and loving on this phone call. And remember that what you're trying to do and what I'm trying to do is encourage others and, put that love out into the world. So that's what I do. And I do that. I fill out almost every category almost every day.
That's
times
impressive.
go by, like when I'm away, where it can fall to the wayside for a minute, but I always go back to it.
I think having a choice of how you react to things, a choice of your emotions, is a really important part of awareness, because we do have a choice. And we were talking a little bit before we started this recording about how cancer sometimes offers a very stark choice between the very tempting societally reinforced position of being a victim versus deciding to live a more empowered life as a result of the knowledge you gain and the self-wisdom you gain in going through this experience. And
Mhm.
it is a choice, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's all a choice. How we respond to anything is a choice. And there's a moment where our survival brain, kicks in and can really take us into fear and despair. But you don't have to stay there. That I find that state incredibly physically uncomfortable and don't like being in it. And so I have some practices that I go to too when I'm feeling that way. And I've written about that choice that we have in that moment to think and feel differently. Breathe. Do some gratitude, think of things that you're grateful for. I'm spacing out now off the top of my head to list any more. But yes, it's a choice. I agree with you.
Well, yeah, and I think part of the choice draws on experience. If you allow yourself to experience joy, for example, you know that that's one of the items in your choice list. You can choose to experience joy rather than despair.
Mm-hmm.
But I
You
think
can.
we have
And
to be
what,
open
and
to it.
yeah, I agree, Pat. And you also need to have kind of a plan. Like one of the things that helps me with all of those categories of the simple process is knowing what my strengths are. And there's a wonderful, free, scientifically valid assessment of character strengths available online. If you want the URL, I can give it to you.
Yeah, please.
And it's the VIA, which stands for Values in Action, but viacharacter.org. And I'm highly trained in that. I'm trained to teach it, in fact, in schools, and did that for a long time in South Africa where I lived. And it's one of the most powerful coaching tools I've ever discovered for myself and for other people. Once you know out of 24 strengths, what are your top signature strengths? The signature meaning you take it with you everywhere you go, and it's what makes you so unique. Like my highest strength is love. And so that means being able to and willing to get really close to other people. Different from kindness, which is, just being good to others. Love allows love in and puts it out into the world. So knowing, for instance, that love is one of my strengths, what can I do in a moment of panic or a moment of discomfort that's loving? Because every time you use one of your top strengths, it feels good.
That's
And
so
they're the easiest ones to lean into. So it's quite strategic.
that's really interesting. It's what else is interesting? You are the second person in 2 days that has mentioned viacharacter.org.
You're kidding.
No, I
What was
actually
the other context?
also in terms of authenticity, identity, and navigating life.
Oh, I have found it useful in all of those ways. I agree with that person 100%.
Yeah, the authenticity piece I find really interesting because I think that it means confronting ourselves in some ways in a kind way, but really digging a little bit to find out who we really are versus who we've allowed ourselves to become and making a choice about how we move forward.
Oh, Pat, I think that's so important. And if I can just tell you, there's a book that was written by a hospice carer, not a registered nurse, but somebody who spent hours and days and weeks with dying people in Australia. Her name is Bronnie Ware, and she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, which is really a manual for living. How can you live in such a way that you don't have these 5 regrets when you die? And the most common regret people expressed over her years of doing this was, I wish I had lived a life true to myself rather than the one others expected of me.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Isn't it just? And I think if we're going to be authentic, we kind of need to learn how. Not necessarily, not having been taught this probably in school or in our families of origin, there are unique ways for each of us to be authentic. And the Via character, to my mind, just gives you like this positive vocabulary for yourself.
I'm going to have to go back and look up what my results were. I don't remember now.
I had to look mine up again too, because I've taken it many times over the last 10 or 12 years, and they do shift, some of them. Not greatly. My lesser strengths are very similar to the ones they've always been. Doesn't mean I have none of them. It just means that I rely on them less than I do on my upper strengths.
Does that knowledge make you want to shift your balance of strengths?
Not so much, because I've learned that you can just lean into the ones that you have naturally in greater abundance and get just about everything done you need to do. So, for instance, there are several different strengths under the category of wisdom and knowledge. And I've got a couple of those in my top strengths: love of learning, and then a sense of perspective, which means just kind of having a worldview that makes sense to me. And they get me by. There are other strengths of wisdom and knowledge that I don't have as high. But I can still use those when I need to. Here's how I think about it. Your top strengths are your starring strengths, right? You're casting a movie, you usually go to the same actors again and again because you can rely on them. And then the middle set of strengths I think of as like your best supporting actors. They're the ones that can show up really pretty easily. They're kind of in the wings waiting to come on stage. And the lower strengths are your cameo appearances. They show up every now and again when the circumstance calls for it, but they aren't the stars.
That's really interesting. I have to go back and review that, because I think that ability to take that knowledge and put it into action is invaluable.
Well, and it helps, if you can think about if you wanted to play to your strengths, it doesn't mean building up every strength so that you've got 5 out of 5, which is how their scoring system works. It means learning how to pick and choose and use the strengths that are called for in a particular situation.
Do you remember, I want to go back to what you were saying about the top 5 regrets of the dying. Do you remember what some of the other items were on that list?
I know them all, yes, and I wrote them down in case you were curious. I wish I'd had the courage to speak up for myself. And I think that one leads directly to the first one, because if you can speak up for yourself, it's easier to live a life that's true to yourself. Speak to the others who want you to live life the way they choose. So I think those two are very interrelated. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. This was apparently expressed by almost every man that Bronnie worked with, because what it meant was they spent less time with their family or their friends if they didn't have a family. But to think that they had dedicated all that time and energy to work meant that they didn't enjoy other aspects of life that are so nice. I wish I had kept up with my friends. People found that they were kind of lonely as they got older and wished that they had reached out on a more regular basis to the people that they cared for. And I wish I had allowed myself to be happy. It's so sad to me to think that, we get this idea in our minds that life is a grind, and that's probably related to work, but that we have to be serious. Some of the examples that Bronnie uses in her book are people who just felt like they had to be serious all the time. And that, life was hard graft. And sometimes, and for some people, it really is. And yet there are ways to work in moments of happiness if you're conscious of it and try.
Oh, I think so too. I think the idea that life is a grind, suggests to me, at least, that you are denying your own authenticity.
Yeah, they're all related, aren't they?
Yeah, the one that really hits me too is the courage to speak up for myself. I think a lot of women, in particular, um, tend to want to please, and as a result, they may not speak up for themselves in a way that is really for their benefit.
I agree. And not only not, and not knowing how is what I was trying to get to. I certainly never learned from my mother how to speak up for myself. She tended to be passive aggressive. So if she had feelings, and you could see that she had feelings, she would broadcast it through body language and other ways, silence. I didn't learn how to speak up for myself. And early in my coaching career, I created a tool to help people do that. And I eventually turned it into a book.
Talk a little bit about your book.
It's called I Speak. You can tell I'm kind of an acronym nut. ISPEAQ, which I like because it's for I Speak Up. But what it means is to essentially what it comes down to is being able to say in a calm way what behavior you don't like and how it adversely affects you and what you would like done differently. So what you want to do is be very specific about something, not you're always late, but when you were 20 minutes late picking me up from the office. Because if you generalize, it's very easy for the other person who's bound to get defensive. It's very easy for them to disagree because you've made a sweeping statement, which can't always be true. But if you say, when you were 20 minutes late picking me up from the office, that's a fact. Then you say how you were adversely affected. It means that I'm going to be late for my book group, or I worried about you, or if it's something that happens all the time, I felt let down again. And those are feelings that you express or facts that you express, which also can't be argued with. So you're staking a claim in something really factual. And then you say what you need instead, what you request, what you require going forward. And that, like, I need you to text me if you're going to be late. I can get more done at my desk in those 20 minutes and then meet you downstairs when you get here. And then finally at the end, because what it is up until that point is kind of a monologue, to make it into a dialogue, you need to inquire what the other person thinks or feels about what you said. So you ask them to speak back to you. Now, if both people in the conversation are familiar with this structure, you can have a really good conversation that doesn't get into the emotion, doesn't sway into emotions and blaming and having my feelings hurt and, just dissolving into a useless conversation.
Boy, that sounds so basic, but it's not at all.
No, it really has to be conscious, and the book is full of worksheets and examples. I take 3 different conversations and weave them all the way through the book. One is among two people sharing an apartment, and one of them is a slob and one of them isn't. Somebody who gets negative feedback at work, but unconstructive feedback at work, and then the other one slips my mind. But so I take it slowly, step by step in each of those sample conversations, and then I give give a worksheet, and then tons of examples at the end, so you can see how it all hangs together.
That's really interesting because, as you were saying earlier, we don't learn a lot of these tools from our families of origin. And
no, because bless them, they don't know them either.
Yeah, no, there's no blame here. It's just a matter of how it is. And it seems like the world is waking up a bit. More people are at least talking about these sorts of things, ways to construct an effective dialogue. I mean, that alone would save so many relationships. My gosh.
Yeah. And it helped me, honestly, when I was in cancer treatment, because I walked away from my first oncologist. And that's kind of an emotion. It's like an emotional and a physical decision. But I speak to help me explain what I was unhappy about and why I wanted to move. And I didn't get any negative feedback from it. And I felt good about, my heart was pounding at the end of it, but I felt good about what I did.
Why did you decide to choose a different doctor?
He was talking. I kind of went quickly through the first few lines of treatment that I was on that were all hormone related. And he said to me one day, well, look, the average lifespan for somebody with your disease is 2 to 5 years. And some people have to be on the low side.
Oh my God.
I thought, okay, so I see how you think this is going to go for me. That isn't necessarily how I think it's going to go for me. And I think the energy that he was bringing to my treatment wasn't what I wanted. And so that was the explicit example I gave of the behavior that upset me and made me feel disempowered and unsupported. And I found a doctor who said, there are so many things we haven't tried yet. And we're still trying them. I'm still going through lines of treatment. So that's an example.
That mind-body connection, I believe, is so powerful and real. I think you have to, one of the lessons I have come away with is I will not allow negative energy in my life.
What a stunning goal.
Now, is it perfect? No. But I do. And are people perfect? No. I don't expect somebody to be, wonderfully positive and radiating good energy all the time. But on balance, they have to be a good person. They have to have good energy. They need to be optimistic. I don't. Life is short, as we have learned, and it becomes really important. It's very important to me to have that good energy around me. It makes all the difference. I will not allow negativity and pessimism to pull me down.
How do you do that?
Oh, good question. I watch and I listen as people talk, their body language, what they say, what their energy is like. If it's a critical or negative energy, I try to pick up on that and just realize this is not a person who's going to be in my inner circle. There are some people I actively avoid. There's some people I actively court. So I think it's a matter of just some discernment and awareness of the people in your life.
And a willingness to be your own advocate, don't you think?
Yeah, that is a good take on it. I don't think of it as being my own advocate per se, but I do think of it as doing what is necessary for me. And that goes back to what you were talking about earlier in self-care. It is not narcissistic. It is not selfish. It is essential.
I agree with you. And in the last week, I've had a character in a book and a friend each say they've decided to drop their unbalanced relationships. So the ones where they give and give and give, but the other person doesn't respond. And it doesn't always have to balance out 100% all the time, but there's got to be an effort there, right? And both those people said, I've just stopped doing that. I've decided, no, I'm not going to invite them to the next thing we do because I keep inviting them and they never invite us. Or, make the phone calls or during the phone call, actually genuinely care about what you have to say. And I think it's so healthy.
Oh, I do too. You have a choice what energy you let into your life. And that goes back to what I said about mind-body issues. But I believe that energy is very real. And I think it's incredibly important, and you have a choice over it. I don't know if you ever read any of Gary Zukav's books.
No, I haven't.
He sees the world, and I'm paraphrasing this terribly, I'm sure, but he sees the world in terms of flows of energy. And if
Mm.
you think of it that way in terms of relationships, how you treat your body, what you do, it's a slightly different take on things. And obviously, you want to position yourself to be in that higher energy environment.
Hmm. Oh, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, his book, oh, I know. The Seed of the Soul is the name of the book. And I read this maybe 20 years ago, and I've since reread it a number of times. And every time I read it, I just see wisdom in his words.
Tell me again the name, The Energy of the
The
Soul.
Seat of the Soul.
The Seat of the Soul.
Yeah.
Sounds like I'm going to have to add to my reading list.
I was looking at your book on Amazon, and I've had to add to my reading list too. Um, so,
It's a quick read. You'll get through it in an hour.
um, I love to read. For me, that is one of those pieces of my real authentic self. I absolutely adore reading. I don't think I could live if I were unable to read in some way.
I don't either. Almost every day in my interests category, it's read. And I can tick that box every single day.
Read, and for me, it's story. I love people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much wisdom, and really we're all the same, we're just having different experiences. So if you can
Yeah,
talk to somebody about and hear about how they handled a situation or their emotional reaction, that is
yeah,
totally relatable, because you may be in a different set of circumstances, but you will have the same emotion, and they will probably show you some different ways to react that you might not think of.
very much so. I love the stories of resilience.
Resilience is usually hard earned.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, having cancer and being resilient is an effort, a worthwhile effort, but it's an effort.
It's a massive effort. I mean, simply going in for a scan is a massive effort. How do you
Have
manage?
you have you heard the term scanxiety?
Oh, yeah, I mean, if I go in for a scan, I'm on the ceiling for 2 weeks beforehand.
Yeah, I've written a couple of blog posts about that.
How do you handle scanxiety?
I handle it by remembering that more of my scans have been positive than have been negative, and that what a scan shows is, but see, my cancer isn't going to go away. So that makes there's maybe something unique about that in terms of scanning. I think if you were told that you were clear of cancer and then you had to keep getting scans and you think it might come back, that'd be a hard thing, hard thing.
And
But
then when it
mine
comes
just
back, it's
shows
even harder.
when what?
And then when it comes back, it's even harder.
Heck yeah. And with me right now, I know that there's active cancer in my liver and in my bones, but the scans I get show minor changes. I get them so frequently, it shows minor changes. And I know that there is at least one more line of treatment that I can go on. And so what I reckon at this stage is if what I'm on isn't working and the scan shows that, then we're going to try something else. But look, I always always when I get the report back, which I do by the end of the day, there's tons of trepidation. I can go into a funk. Sure, I can. I'm, just as human as the next gal.
But the trick is knowing those strengths that can pull you out of it.
That and knowing that I've been living my life for a while, not having those regrets, those 5 regrets that I told you about. Because none of us knows how long we're going to be here. None of us has a get out of jail free card in this life. But if you can live in such a way that you feel you are living authentically, that you are prioritizing your important relationships, all the things that kind of are part of this daily tracking system I do, I can think, well, you know what? If and when my treatment ever stops being effective and I get bad news, it's going to suck. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to be overwhelmed by regrets and what ifs like I felt when I was first diagnosed.
I want to ask a difficult question. Has
Sure.
your view of death changed as you've gone through this process?
Yes, it has. Um, from barely giving it a moment's thought to now feeling incredibly spiritual. In fact, spirituality is now one of my top 5 strengths. And part of that is from a near-death experience that I had when I was 10 years old, where I was absolutely sure I saw a glimpse of the other side.
Oh,
And
tell
that,
me about it a little bit.
okay, it gives me enormous comfort that this isn't all there is. I had been riding in a car with my family into the mountains. We live in Colorado. And it had been a long drive, and my parents stopped at a hotel in this little town to pick up a key to a cabin and said we could kind of run around in the grassy space in front of the hotel. And I had bare feet and I did cartwheels in the grass, and the grass was wet. And then I wandered over with my littlest brother toward the sign, the motel sign, which was neon, and it was humming. And I thought, I wonder if I could touch that real quick and see, like I had seen my mother touch the iron. She would lick her finger and she would real quick on the iron to see if it had heated up. So I was already wet. So I went to go touch that sign and let go of it. And I was immediately electrocuted with what an electrician friend of mine, reckoned was about 20,000 volts of electricity. And while I was stuck there, I screamed, apparently. My little brother says I screamed, but I wasn't aware of what was happening to me. Instead, what I saw was me going out of my body toward another space. From that space, which I could see had light on the back of it, there were beings coming toward me. And I said, is it time for me to come back already? And they were like, nope, 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 not yet. And what happened in that time was the sign shattered. There had been a crack in it, and the electricity surging through it caused it to shatter. And I was released from it, unconscious, into the grass. And I always felt that a few things. This is not all there is. There's something else there. There's some kind of plan. And what's on the other side is benevolent. And that we are all connected. On that side, I think we are just all connected. And here we are, just humans having this earthly experience, but we really are spiritual beings. And so how that has helped me in this process is to feel that when I go, I'm going somewhere and it's okay. And I would say, yes, that does really help me.
That's a massive
It's going to be
realization.
scary to let go. It's going to be scary to let go. And yet I think I'll be all right.
One of the people I interviewed who really impacted me profoundly in this realm was Mary Neal, who also had a near death experience. And she made a comment that I think is just so wise and potentially transformative. She said, I went from hope to trust. Think about what a
I
paradigm shift.
love that. And I'm going to steal that.
I mean, think about what a paradigm shift that is in terms of how you view and approach and experience life.
Mm-hmm. I went from hope to trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say sometimes my trust waxes and wanes. But it's there.
What advice would you give to somebody facing a life and death bump in the road?
I suppose it depends on what their status was, how much time they have to do things differently. If they had very little time, I would just say count your blessings. What has this life given you that you're grateful for? Because that's a nicer place for your mental health to be than what are my regrets? I've never been asked this question, so I'm making this up as I go along.
No, that's a wonderful perspective.
Well, again, it's choice of where you put your energy, right?
Yeah, I look at our stories, and if it were like a timeline where we could, jot down specific events, what if we could tell our stories from a perspective of anger, love, gratitude, all these different emotions? And then you could see how differently the story is told. And
yes.
And it creates a choice of how do you perceive your story?
I was trained in life coaching by Martha Beck. And one of the assignments we got very early on was in the training, actual training, which I did in 2009, was write down some pivotal moments of your life. So each, half a dozen or so. And then we were told, write out your story as the victim of circumstance.
Ooh.
Right? So each of those things became a poor me, how it held me back, how much it hurt, any of those things. Then she said, now write it, same elements to the story, write it as a hero's epic. And so it became a story of overcoming and resilience and survival and strength. And I think that's just a choice that we have all the time, is how to tell the story of the facts of our lives.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
I suppose parts of it. But I also, another wise advice I got from Martha Beck was, so what? Now what? Which is about radical acceptance of the circumstances the way they are. So yeah, I might want to do some things differently, but I can't. I can't rewrite the past. But what can I do now that makes me, well, I suppose it's living without regret again.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.